I was once told a story, and since my grandfather was a fisherman, he always told me, the bigger the fish is, the better. Never check a good story. So I haven't checked this. But it was a guy from Gothenburg traveling to China, and he was asked, where are you from? And he said, I'm from Gothenburg. And the Chinese guy thought for a second, and Gothenburg. Is that a small little city close to Dunse? And isn't that amazing, the part that Dunse is playing in this huge business, huge worldwide business of shipping. And I think one of the reasons for that is the entrepreneurship. All the amazing entrepreneurs coming from this island and making the world of shipping a better place. So we will kick off this event today by welcoming one of these entrepreneurs on stage, the Group CEO of Northern Offshore Services, David Christensson. Welcome.
Today, we are very excited and proud. We are very much looking forward. We are very much looking forward to having all you here today and to be able to take part of today's agenda and listen to all the interesting participants on the stage. We are certain that we will be inspired, get some advice, maybe real promises, how we could develop our business models and companies in the future. We have a high expectation to this seminar, that it will be a clear message what we could do as ship owners to be able to be the top performers in the future. In respect of finance, together with green investments and that type of energy we should use to be able to be fit for 55. And how we will, with the logistics chain ashore and our customers, integrate with our vessels so we could reduce unnecessary delays at, for example, in ports and in hubs. The ship owner living in the Dunse cluster have a history to be a first movers when it comes to the environmental investments, working environmental investments, and to build the most efficient vessels. As we have seen historically, our feeling are often that we as ship owners always have to take the first step in investments in a new generation vessels before our legislators, authorities, customers, financiers, and terminal owners are able to share the commercial and financial risk with us. We hope seminars and meetings like DSM will be able to change that. I will give you all a small historical view on what we have done at Dunse in the past to be ahead of the development curve. In the beginning of the 1900s, the first merchants from Dunse began to sell kerosene to the households that was used for fuel for lamps. At that time, they sailed out kerosene in drums with small sailing boats. But already in 1907, the first fishermen in Dunse started to install engines in their fishing vessels. And already 3 years old, all vessels at and they started to catch more fish, and with that, bigger income. In 1910, the merchant in Dunse ordered engine-powered vessels that was bigger, more efficient, so they could supply the fishermen with fuel that at that time were pumps from drums. Some also used them as combined fishing and cargo vessels. In the beginning of the 1920s, the first fixed cargo tanks was installed in these existing vessels. The size was around 5,000 liters and made the merchant to be able to buy oil in Gothenburg in bulk and get better prices compared to drums and develop their business further. And already a few years later, they ordered the first new build vessel with fixed tanks that was installed from the beginning. These vessels could carry up to almost a huge quantity of 13 cubic meters. The development continued, and in the 1960s, there was a grounding in the Lake of Mälaren in Sweden when the ship owner came, and when the ship owner came to the vessel and saw this, he immediately understood that we need to take care of our environment and the society. And he took the decision that is there any possibility to increase the environmental care, I will do it. And the result was already in 1974, Tärnhav. It was the first double-bottom new-build tanker that arrived to Dunse. More than 20 years before the international rules came into force that a tanker need to have double hull. And more than 40 years ahead of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. This example gives us a picture what drives us entrepreneurs at Dunse and has always been our drive force. Respect earth and life, care for the community, build democratic societies, secure earth bounty and beauty for the present and future generation, or what we at Dunse call it, common sense. Since almost 10 years, 2014, we have already been building and operating vessel that will be able to meet the IMO international rules for environmental care for 2050. As a paradox, this vessel will already be replaced before 2050 because the age restriction from our commercial customers. Thanks to this extreme track record, as we have done as ship owners in Dunse in the last 100 years, we need partners that believe and assist us, and when we develop our new vessels and business ideas in an earlier stage. So we will be able to have access to, for example, green finance in respect of lending terms, and of course, higher loan to value. Authorities that gives the vessel the right incentives, long-term commitments from our customers, and good terms in the harbor or terminals. So our vessels that we build and develop will have at least the same competitiveness compared to a vessel that just fulfill the minimum standards. And that these partners will have the possibility to share the risk, so it's not only solely on the ship owner. If we all work together, we will have the possibility to meet the UN Sustainable Development Goals and to build a more sustainable future and a better working environment for all of us. We are proud of DSM today and what we at the Dunse Cluster managed to achieve when we work together. Welcome to Dunse.
Thank you, David. Thank you so much. Really inspiring. And another way to get inspired is sometimes to look maybe not only in the business itself, but look to other businesses. So we will now welcome our first keynote speaker, and she's from the automotive industry. She's head of sustainability at Polestar. Give a warm hand for Fredrika Klarén.
Thank you so much. Let's see if this works. It does. Hi, everyone. I'm Fredrika Klarén. I work as head of sustainability at Polestar. And funnily enough, Polestar was on the agenda, and I was asked to come here without people knowing that I'm actually born and bred at Dunse. So it's very funny and an honor for me to really stand on the stage where I've stood many Sundays and sang in this church. But now I'm here today to describe to you how we are working at Polestar with accelerating the transition into sustainable mobility, and that you all play a key part in our endeavor to make this possible. Some assistance, maybe?
Objects. I was overwhelmed by its beauty. I felt the thrill of being part of the human race. It was crazy to me that the same species that started and stones was now the same one looking at it from space. It also made me think that this tiny blue dot is extremely fragile. You know, our need to advance our species often comes at the expense of our home. The question is, can we continue our species and preserve our only home while still enjoying that thrill of being human?
Are driven by this question. How can we prosper and progress as a species whilst at the same time protecting our only home? And we know that what we provide, electric cars, is a powerful climate solution already today, but that we need to really tap into the power of that solution and accelerate now the adoption of electric cars to really meet the climate crisis that we are in. We are in a rampant climate crisis. We were founded in this significant time when we so clearly see the impact businesses has on all of these environmental issues and also social issues. We have the rampant climate crisis. We have a loss of biodiversity that is unprecedented. We have growing inequality all around the world. And in supply chains, we have anti-corruption, human rights violations occurring on an everyday. So as a young company, it's very clear to us that we have a role to play here. And we have set out to improve society with what we do. But we also want to talk about the fact that we really have to make it more tangible. What does it mean improving society with what we do? And we want to tap into 4 key drivers for sustainable development: climate neutrality, circularity, transparency, and inclusion. And these 4 areas are what we are putting all of our attention into now at Polestar. We use life cycle assessment to measure the impact of the choices that we make throughout the product sustainability declaration. And when we were developing Polestar 2, we got to compare Polestar 2 to a car that is built on the same platform, the XC40 ICE, which is a petrol car. We are an affiliate to Volvo, and we really were able to collaborate around this. And like I said before, EVs are a climate solution, and it's very clear when you look at the numbers. The bar on the left is the XC40 petrol car, and the 3 other bars are a Polestar 2, which is charged with different types of electricity, from global electricity mix to the European one, and if you charge it with renewable energy. And you can clearly see that you can actually more than half the climate impact if you choose an electric car instead of going with a petrol car. And this is an amazing impact that we can have as consumers already today. But we at Polestar are not satisfied with this. We also know that to make this transition now, we have to really look at how we produce cars and batteries. So we have decided to create a truly climate neutral car by 2030. Don't know where to point the clicker to actually move the... If I do like this instead, Axel, you can press. We have decided to create a fully climate neutral car by 2030 because we want to create this sense of urgency that it's really up to us as designers, engineers, to find these solutions on how to make all of the 20,000 plus components going into a car in a completely climate neutral way. And we have to do that this decade. We cannot wait for someone else to solve this, and especially not after 2030. We need to start bending the curve now. So we are working now with the Polestar Zero project, and the project is currently all about innovation and research. We will have some years where we research and innovate together with startups, but also heavy industry players, with NGOs, researchers, to really secure that we tackle all of these complex issues, like, for example, how can we produce aluminium without direct CO2 emissions from the process. Then we will get into some advanced engineering, and then we will have the normal product development phase, the last couple of years. So we don't know how this car looks like today. All we know is that it will be a car that you can actually drive and buy. This is not some concept car. And we also know that we will not use offsetting as a solution, since it is indeed not a solution that will have any impact on emissions this decade. We have already signed partnerships with Swedish steel producer SSAB, Norwegian aluminium producer Norsk Hydro. We have Autoliv on board, as well as ZF and ZKW. And we've also put out a call to action for any innovator, startup, company, organization who might have an idea to come forward and contact us so that we can explore if we can collaborate around this. And please, people in the room, feel free to contact me if you also have ideas around this. Logistics will be a part of this project. We will secure that all of the supplier tiers are completely climate neutral, as well as the transports between those. So we absolutely need to work with you guys in terms of creating climate neutral transport by 2030 for us to be able to deliver on this goal. Axel? We also, moving along from climate, we also see the need for greater transparency in our supply chains. And Polestar 2 was actually the first car on the market where we have fully traced cobalt from mine to finished product through blockchain. I've worked with sustainability for many years. Traceability has been kind of the holy grail. But it's been easily corrupted, it's been costly, it's been bureaucratic, stamps on paper and so on. Enter blockchain, this amazing, efficient, immutable system by which we can create traceability in supply chains, also here including transports, of course. So this is something that we're very excited about, and we have now added traceability on another risk mineral called mica, and we're looking at also broadening the scope. Finally, just an example of how we work with circularity. Closing the loop is, of course, important for us, and you're also a huge part of that. And when we work with concept cars, we're able to kind of try to solve ideas that are a bit more fuzzy. So when we create a Polestar 02, our concept car, we wanted to look at the fact that most materials in a car is very recyclable, but they are today downgraded because of the lack of infrastructure. So we actually came up with a really easy solution for this, which is very in line with our design thinking and our graphical thinking. We simply marked what grade the aluminium came in, which means that a recycler, like Stena, for example, can see what quality grade the aluminium has and save it and recycle it so that it can be used in cars again instead of downcycled. And that's just some of the examples that we are doing to close the loop. But Polestar 0 will, of course, mean a big change in terms of innovation. But I also really want to create the sense of urgency that we actually have just a couple of years before it's too late, before we will go above 1.5 degrees. We need to see incremental changes now. That's why we're very happy that we've been able to lower the footprint of Polestar 2, the car that we have on the market, simply by resourcing the aluminium so that it's produced with renewable energy. We've been able to shave off more than a ton of CO2 by doing this. And finally, transparency will be key in this. Everything that we do builds on the fact that we will have an attractive offer that people actually want to use, that they believe in, that they trust. So at Polestar, we have set ourselves the ambition to become the most transparent car maker in the world. We publish our full life cycle assessment and the methodology towards anyone who wants to be that nerdy and go into that kind of detail. We also have a product sustainability declaration where we guide our consumers in terms of the sustainability performance of our different models. And when we get to 2030, we will declare a carbon footprint for Polestar 0 that says 0 tons of CO2e. And I hope that you can be a part of that journey. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Fredrika. To be able to reach those goals and make the change that Fredrika is speaking about, the industry and the politicians need to walk hand in hand. That's for sure. And we know about the European Green Deal, the Fit for 55 package, etc. So it's an honor for us at DSM to now welcome one of the most influential politicians to this meeting. Unfortunately, she's in Lisbon at the moment. So now we will try some modern technique here and see if we can get Magda Kopczynska on a link. Magda is, as I guess many of you know about her, she's the Director of Maritime Strategy at DG Move at the European Commission. So let's see if we can get Magda in here.
I am there. Now the question is whether you can see me. Okay.
We see you and we hear you. Welcome, Magda. A big hand for Magda.
Thank you. Okay, that's going to be one of the most challenging online speeches that I have given, because normally when you do that speech, you just see your own face in the camera. Now, thanks to kind technical assistance, I'm actually seeing the room. But it seems I see you frozen and a bit delayed. So there's a very good chance that if what I say doesn't make any sense and you will show it, I will not realize it till 1 minute later when I'm already talking about something else. So we'll have to see how it goes. And I'm also very much impressed by the fascinating building in which you are meeting. Big apologies that I couldn't join you. I'm actually not technically in Lisbon yet, but I will be boarding a plane to Lisbon in 3 hours and simply flying between Brussels, Sweden and Lisbon all in one day would not work. And especially it would not work those days when any flight connections, as many of you know, seem to be faced with additional challenges. Now, after this long introduction, a very warm good morning to everybody. And thank you very much for inviting me and asking me to say a few words, or maybe a bit more than few words, about the Fit for 55 and the framework and where we are and what's going to happen and what we would like to see happen. And also how all of you can help with making that happen. That big debt is of course decarbonization, which has been very firmly in the top priorities of this commission when the college took office in 2019. And in spite of all the challenges and changes that we had to deal with as well when COVID happened, and we all had to change the way we work, the way we travel. Well, we didn't travel, so basically that was the big change. But the way we work and also where we prioritize, what we focus on, the green agenda didn't disappear. We got the climate law adopted, where all EU countries signed off for minus 55 reduction in 2030 and also carbon neutrality for the EU in 2050, with this big claim that we want to be the first carbon neutral continent by 2050, and that was followed with quite a big package of different proposals addressing different areas of economy, including shipping. And it's even a bit more than including shipping, because shipping from the very beginning of our discussions was pointed to as a sector that somehow found itself in a bit of a void in terms of what instruments should be put in place to push shipping in the right direction of decarbonization. Everybody agrees, and when I say everybody, I absolutely include in this European Commission, that shipping is a global sector and as such needs to be regulated at the global level through International Maritime Organization regulatory framework. But International Maritime Organization, with its 175 members, is of course a rather complex entity to deal with issues as complicated and as novel for that organization as climate change and decarbonization. Hence, this political decision that while we work with the IMO, while we support IMO member states in moving in the direction of decarbonization, and I will come back to last week's MEPC at the end. So in addition to working with the IMO, we'll also go ahead at the EU level. And we went ahead with a couple of proposals, all relevant, all important for all of you, and all building a framework that we very much believe will be then further developed or will be further developed at the international level to really lead us to an international regulation that will push shipping on the pathway to zero, net zero. Again, another topic worth discussing, maybe towards the end in 2050. In that package of European legislation, there are a few things that everybody knows about. Putting shipping in the emission trading scheme system, which is a system that has been in place in the EU for many years, did not affect many sectors, affect mostly land-based energy-intensive industries, energy production industries, but following that political decision, is now being extended to few other sectors, including shipping. Emission trading scheme that will make shipping pay for emitting above certain levels, that will de facto lead to huge increases in the energy efficiency of shipping activities. That energy efficiency, as again you know very well, can be achieved through different means, and we do not say which means should be used. But basically, once shipping becomes more energy efficient, emits less, it will pay less in the context of ETS. It will save money. So that's the market-based measure mechanism pushing for decarbonization through making carbon more expensive. But in addition to that, and following a lot of discussions we had also, or first and foremost, with the shipping industry, and internally in the Commission, we realized that if we want to look into a long-term decarbonization of shipping, those improvements in energy efficiency will not do the trick. They will only get us as far as they can get us, because ultimately we need new sources of energy for shipping. We need alternative fuels. We need zero-emission fuels to enter the sector. It's not an easy transition, it's not a cheap transition, and it's not a fast transition, which is why we came up with this other piece of legislation, Fuel EU Maritime, which introduces gradually more stringent requirements when it comes to the level of reduction of greenhouse gas intensity of energy used on board. And I know this long line sounds extremely complex, but de facto it's very simple. What we will ask of all ships calling at EU ports when it comes to journeys between EU ports, and 50% of incoming and ongoing international ship sailing, we will ask them that as of 2025, the energy used on board will be gradually becoming cleaner and cleaner. We'll start with the target of 2% 2025, going all the way to 75% in 2050. Again, transition to alternative fuels is not easy. It's not cheap, and it's not fast, which is why we came up with a proposal that starts on a rather modest way. 2% improvement is not very costly and is not complicated to achieve, but it gives a long transition and long time perspective so that everybody knows what their ships should be capable of when it gets to 2050. And in addition, we also introduced this mechanism that if you have a fleet of a few vessels and you will decide to invest in one zero emission ferry, for example, you will be much more compliant than those 2% or 6% or 13% in 2025, 2030, and 2035, respectively. You will be over compliant, and you can use this over compliance to make up for all your other ships while you're waiting till they become more zero emission or less energy, less carbon intensive, if I may say so. Again, it's I don't like to use the word complicated. I like to use the word sophisticated system, because this is the first time that we really address the problem of fuels used on board. Yes, we looked at fuels in the context of low sulfur. I do remember fascinating discussion that I had, especially with shipping associations, with ship owners along the SECA areas, agreed upon 10 years ago. But there it was different. Here we are really looking at the transition of all the energy used on board of vessels. We very much hope that it will be a very strong push in terms of new technologies, new research, new development, also for European companies, that it will give a push to all the maritime technology clusters that exist in Europe. And finally, I am also very happy that when you look to discussions at the International Maritime Organization, one of the measures that are being considered as an element of the big puzzle that the IMO will have to come up with to push for decarbonization of shipping is a fuel standard, which is very closely modeled on the Fuel EU proposal that we put forward at the EU level. Because the whole point about those proposals that we put at the EU level was also to, on the one hand, of course, push for faster decarbonization when it comes to European Union and to ships coming in and out of EU ports, but it's also to show to the international community that things can be done and that things can work, and to use all the lessons, all the learning, all the testing, all the mistakes that we maybe sometimes have made, but then hopefully have corrected ourselves, to use them when preparing international legislation. We also have a piece of legislation on the table that will look at the infrastructure, because you cannot just address the ships, you also have to address the ports to make sure that sufficient infrastructure for alternative fuels will be available in EU ports, and it will be available. Alternative fuels infrastructure regulation is also in the discussion. And we also proposed a revision of the Renewable Energy Directive to make sure that whatever is being done in terms of how we understand what is renewable energy is done in the same way across all sectors of economy in the EU, and can also be used when it comes to certification, for example, of fuel providers providing bunker fuels outside the EU. Because what's very important is that we develop a consistent and harmonized framework where we know exactly which fuels fulfill which requirements, what's the understanding of this very important question of sustainability. That is also one of the reasons why for Fuel EU we based everything on the well to wake approach, to have the full cycle of emissions addressed, because only then we can be talking seriously about decarbonization. This package was put on the table exactly 11 months ago, July 14th, 2021. We have now Council, EU member states agree on all of on the infrastructure and on Fuel EU. Emission trading scheme should be discussed in the Environmental Council. I hope you haven't lost. Okay, no, you're still there, because I just lost the picture, so I wasn't sure that I was not speaking in the void. So the emission trading scheme will be discussed at the end of June in the Environmental Council. The Parliament is discussing things on and off, and you might have noted that last week when emission trading scheme was to be voted by the European Parliament in the plenary, it was actually rejected. Two important comments. This is the full ETS. The ETS proposal looked at many other sectors, not just shipping. It was rejected in the plenary. It was now returned back to the committee. We'll need to see what the European Parliament does with it, because these were quite intensive and quite difficult discussions between different European political groups. There is a new vote scheduled for the 22nd, and we'll take it from there. While the discussions on Fuel EU and the European Parliament are still ahead of us. The Transport Committee will only vote at the beginning of July. But I like to repeat often that we need both sides of the equation. We need a market-based measure. We need a price on carbon. That's the ETS. But we need the alternative fuels solution as well, because, as I said earlier, we can only get as far with pushing for energy efficiency. We need a stronger push for the most complicated transition, which is developing, testing, and then deploying alternative fuels when it comes to the IMO, when it comes to shipping. And just very last thing that I wanted to say, and I promised that I would again come back to the IMO and to the MEPC of last week. Those of you who have been following IMO discussions, you know that there is always this not necessarily very fast space, but very fast pace, but small steps being taken in the right direction. Hopefully by the end of the year, we should have a more firm agreement in terms of which measures will be developed as part of the decarbonization strategy of the IMO. But what is very interesting to watch is the discussion in the IMO on the revision of the decarbonization strategy. The one agreed in 2018 with the target reduction by 50% of emissions by 2050. Everybody agrees it's not ambitious enough. Everybody agrees it's outdated. Everybody agrees it has to be revised. How much it will be revised? How far will we go? Well, we have this possibility of having an agreement of zero emissions by 2050. Discussions still on the table whether it's absolute zero or net zero. Don't ask me which one will win. I don't know today. But interestingly, we already have quite a big group of NGOs saying that absolute zero by 2050 is not enough, and they expect absolute zero by 2040 at the latest. I don't know what will be the ultimate outcome of discussions at the IMO. We should have this strategy revised by 2023, but it does show that the pace of discussions when it comes to decarbonization of shipping has changed fundamentally. And topics which were impossible to conceive 5 years ago are on the table now. Not only the level of ambition of the target of the strategy, but also concrete specific discussion on a market-based measure at a global level, on a fuel standard at a global level. So I think with all that, when it comes to achieving a political and regulatory framework that will push for decarbonization, we will make it, and it will happen, including at the global level. But once that happens, you will be the ones who will need to work and find ways to comply with that framework. And I very much hope that with several different instruments, financial instruments, support to R&D, and various ideas that have been put on the table over the last 12 months with green lanes, with different declarations at the highest political level, we will also be there together to make sure that those ambitious targets related to decarbonization of shipping can be achieved. Thank you so much, and I do hope that my voice did get through on the other side.
Thank you so much, Magda. We hear you really well, and yeah, really good info for everyone here, I guess. And it seems like we have, yeah, it's really hopeful, I think, to hear that things are going in the right direction. So thank you once again, and have a good trip to Lisbon.
Thank you so much, and again, wishing you a good day of discussions. I've seen the program, and it looks extremely promising. So sorry about not being there in person. I can promise I'll try it next time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now it's time for the first panel discussion. And I would like to welcome up on stage the moderator of this, Anna Steffensen, the CEO of Danish Shipping. And I will let you introduce the panel.
Yes, I will. Well, thank you very much indeed, and thank you for inviting me to Dunshire once again. This is the highlight every 2 years. But also have a very interesting program to attend to. So thank you very much indeed for that. I'm the CEO of Danish Shipping. I have the privilege of being very close to some of the ship owners in Dunshire, together with a lot of other ship owners, of course. And I have followed what has happened in Dunshire over the past years. And I have to say that you have been front runners, not least in the turn to LNG. I'm sure you're also going to be front runners when we go towards the green transition. Well, I'm not going to stand here alone. It's actually not my job to do all the talking today. I will try to moderate some very wise men, 3 wise men actually. And the first is Karl-Johan. Please, Karl-Johan Hagman, please come on the stage. You are CEO in Stena Rederi. Please come on. We will have Niklas Gustafsson, Head of Public Policy and Regulatory Affairs in the Volvo Group. Please, Niklas, come on stage. And then we will have Gustav Leifland, Procurement Analyst at Orkla Group. Please, Niklas, come up here. And before we start this debate, let me just say that, and you know, it has already been said, and the agenda has already been set by the previous speakers. But transition of shipping towards a green, carbon-neutral future is, of course, the task of our generation. It's the biggest task at hand, and we have to do as much as we can to actually get there, because it's not going to happen by itself. We have to act, and I liked the priest Anders, who was here on the stage as the first speaker. He said, and I quote, "You have the ability to respond. You have the responsibility to respond." And I think that's exactly what our discussions here are all about. So today it will, we've heard from the regulator side, we also heard from Polestar. In this panel we will hear from not only ship owner but also from 2 cargo owners on how we can accelerate the transition towards zero. And I hope we will have a good panel discussion in the sense that I have asked my panelists to actually challenge each other, in the sense that just, you know, paying lip service, doing nice talk, and yes, we are on the way, and all the rest of it, it's not going to move us any further. So I really hope that the 3 of our panelists will challenge each other. So let me start by just one question to each one of you. Are there anything to this discussion we should take away from the 2 first speakers? Are there one key takeaway which you think that actually enlightened you in the discussion towards transition shipping towards zero? We'll start with you, Karl-Johan. Was there one thing that you would take away from what we heard?
This one, okay. I think Magda's last statement here saying that this is fundamental change. Not here in Donsö, but I mean, I represent an industry that emits 1 billion tons of CO2 per year. It's increasing, and the vast majority of vessels that are being ordered at shipyards today that will be delivered from 2025-26 going forward are not dual fuel engines. So I mean, there are a lot of people in our business that are betting on that this is not happening, while I think the message that we just received, I mean, was pretty unequivocal.
Yeah, thank you very much. So it is going to happen, and we have to respond. Niklas, one key takeaway from your side?
Yes, and just let me start by saying thank you for the organizers to invite me here. It's great to be at this shipping event. Being a trucker, that's very important that we connect the different transport systems here. So that's great. I think maybe my main takeaway from Fredrika, of course, sustainability is everything, and the transition is key. Let's talk more about that. Magda, great ambitions from the Commission, and we really, from Volvo Group, we really support the Fit for 55 package in all its components that is supporting the transition, mainly then in the transport on-road transport industry. We support that a lot. I'm worried that what she ended with, Worried that it would be watered out now in council and in parliament, and we need that full toolbox to make this transition happen. And Commission ambition, absolutely okay, could have been even tougher, but okay. But what will happen with the member states and Parliament and Council, that worries me.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much indeed. What about from your perspective, Gustav? Is there any one takeaway from what we heard this morning?
Yes, as Niklas said, also thank you for letting Orkla come here today as well. But I would say transparency. Mm-hmm. For us, transparency is key to be able to make the transition, and for us at Orkla to actually see what's going on. So we want transparency. That's one of the key takeaways for me.
Mm. And that was very clear, I think, in Frederica's intervention earlier this morning. So there's something about the magnitude of this, and it's going to happen. There's something about, we need the full toolbox, and there's something about transparency. Mm-hmm. Can I pose? I talked to the panelists before, and one of the things that Karl-Johan said, which I think is a little bit provocative for a lot of ship owners, is that we say we are in hard to abate industry, but is that actually true? Why don't we just go out and do it? What is it that we are lacking, not just to act as it is? So I think you should elaborate a little bit on this, because there's a lot of ship owners here who would say that we are hard to abate industry. So what is it that we need to actually do? Take the first actions.
Yeah, so if both that we, so I think 3-4 years ago it wasn't even debated if this could be done, and I think it's extraordinary, and I think it's fantastically inspiring that we now do have pathways. So we're not fully there, but I mean there's no doubt that methanol works. There's no doubt that ammonia is on its way. There's no doubt that as a transition will be enough to meet the 2050 goals, whether they are 50% reduction or 0% reduction. So I think that whole technical conversation, and again, now just saying nice things about Dunse, to get the whole technical industry here at this island actually having technical conversations, I think is really neat. So the conversation I think we're really getting at is, it's not a hard to abate industry from a technical point of view, but it's from a structural point of view. And I think David's introducing comments here, without regulatory support, without customer support, without infrastructure support, he's actually built a company and an industry sort of on his own will. So you guys are cargo owners, we are ship owners, we're buyers of fuel, and therefore it's a hard to abate industry in that we're not getting our conversation together. So it's really David who should be heading up this panel, is sort of the ability to change a mindset where this I would think is philosophically a hard to abate industry, but not technically.
No, but the thing is that we all say that we're going to wait for something else to happen. Nothing will happen. It's the hen and egg discussion. So what is the first thing that needs to be happening before you actually start building methanol-driven ships?
Well, the ideal solution, of course, is a global CO2 tax. I mean, if we'd had that, this would have been fixed in 3-4 years. If we'd had that 20 years ago, we wouldn't be having this debate either. No. And the fact that the world cannot unite around a carbon tax, I think, is striking. However, I think there's a sea change. So some of us were at COP26 in Glasgow, and the US Undersecretary of Energy went in and said, we will support a global CO2 tax. And this was a room, it was an ICS event, so the room was filled with ship owners. Everybody stood up and applauded. Now, if that had been said 3-4 years ago, they would have been throwing tomatoes at him and said so I think there's a huge shift in the industry, that as long as we have a level playing field, we can do anything. And I think it actually speaks to Dunse's and Scandinavia's and maybe even the Danes' advantage, I mean, the higher the quality aspects, I think the better off we will be. And that's really what we want to hear from our customers. Absolutely. is that this is what you are looking for, because I think what Polestar is showing, I think is great, and I think we all want to be good people, but the fact that we haven't come here, of course, falls upon us, and I think that the fact that we cannot sit around and wait for a global CO2 tax is disturbing, because that would have been the elegant solution.
Of course, but it's not going to happen. At least it will happen, but it's not going to happen in the near future. And as Magda said, last year's MEPC was, small steps forward, but nothing near even discussing a CO2 tax or an MBM. So in that respect, I mean, there's a long way to go. So, but what you're saying is really that we are waiting a little bit for the regulators. If the regulators could come in on a global level, it will make it so much easier. But we have the cargo owners here. They are the market regulators. The market regulators. Why are you not pushing this much more strongly than you've done so far? Because usually we would say that if the market is there and somebody's going to pay for it, we can move ahead. So yeah, please.
Yeah, first,
Niklas.
First I have a struggle with this hard to abate wording. I think it's a trap for us all. Trucking used to be a hard to abate industry also 3 years away. I like the history description here, Karl-Johan, because we are actually talking about the history. We just need to look 3 years back. That's the short term we are actually thinking about. 3 years back, we had trucking also to be a hard-to-abate sector. Now, very few people are talking about trucking as a hard-to-abate sector because it's happening. It will happen in shipping as well. It's happening in cement. It's happening in steel, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, let's not lock ourselves into what is hard and what is not hard. Let's make it to-abate sector instead, And how to get that moving? I would like to see policymakers pushing us, but I don't think we have the time to wait for it, honestly. It would be great with a global CO2 tax. It could also be okay with an European CO2 emission trading system for transport. I mean, fine, let's start somewhere, but I'm worried, as I said. So I think we in industry, we need to make this quite a bit on our own, actually. One good thing that we can do, besides building very nice ships, is of course to build very nice partnerships as well, right? And this is exactly what we can do. And one example, very recent example, is something that was shaped during COP, or launched at COP26 in Glasgow, a few months back, 6 months back, right? 7. And that is the First Movers Coalition. What is that? It is yet another commitment, for these COP people like us. We get 7, 8, 10, 15 different commitments that people want us to sign, right? But this one is a little bit different because it's committing to utilize your purchasing power. So being
Which
Volvo,
you have.
Exactly, so I'm coming to your point.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
But instead of Volvo just committing to, this year we will sell only zero-emission trucks and zero-emission buses and construction equipment. Fine, we can do that as well. But this one is more efficient as a tool because then we commit to only buying zero-emission trucking, for instance. Shipping is coming up, steel and cement and so on and so on. And it's right now like 55 different companies, global companies, signed up for this. I ask you all companies in here to sign up for it because it's quite easy. It's a little bit challenging because you don't know the premium price all the time. What is the premium price of fossil-free steel? We don't know, but we signed up anyway. And we built a partnership with SSAB and LKAB and so on. And where are we? 7 months later, we actually, 2 weeks back today, we handed over the first yellow, very beautiful articulated hauler to the customer, completely built in fossil-free steel. So, I mean, this tool of utilizing that purchasing power, it's like, I think it was $8.5 trillion all of a sudden, these 55 companies, right? So I think we as industry, in the chain, supply chain, we need to move. We can do this with or without. It will be helpful, of course, with the policymakers' tools, but if they can't move.
And does that mean, just for me to be clear, so it means that if you are a member of the First Movers Coalition, you actually also say that you are going to pay for having, for example, CO2 emission-free shipping.
Yes.
Is that it?
You commit to pay a premium price.
Okay. And
So
the
it's,
premium price is being fixed by the market? Or?
The market.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So that's the risk in it. You don't know. You don't know always what the
You
premium
don't know
price
the price, actually, yeah.
But it has to be done, right?
Yeah.
with the
And
results.
from when is that going to start?
It's up and running now, and the targets of what you commit to is actually in 2030.
Okay.
So for instance, for steel then, we have committed to buy at least 10% of our steel will be fossil-free
Okay.
by 2030.
Okay.
And then for trucking, it's all the inbound and outbound transport. We don't only build trucks, we actually transport a lot of things,
Sure.
right? And that is, in 2030, it's like 35% of your trucking that you need will be fossil-free.
And when is shipping going to be part of it?
It's in there already. Some companies already signed up. We have people right now on Hisingen, which maybe some of you don't know, but it's another island quite close to Donsö, actually, just north.
I'm sure that
They are looking into this now. So Carl-Johan, yes, we will sign this, and then one thing is signing, and then one thing is shaking hand on a contract and make it happen.
Can I
Yeah, please. We'll have Gustav in a second, but please, Carl-Johan. Yeah.
that? Because it's not only about signing it, but then it's actually monitoring it.
Yes.
So if not to expose anybody here, but in our tanker business, I mean, we since 4 years back, we sell a biofuel emulsion. We consume about 1.2, 1.3 million tons. And of course, during the past 4 years, we have sold 0 liters because there's not one single customer out there who's willing to pay one single penny from when this gets into the hands of the purchasing department. So, I mean, it's incredibly important that you don't sign up to these declarations, but that actually does cascade into the actual purchasing, because it's really, it's a time for action.
But that must be the cue for Gustav, because he's a procurement officer.
Yes.
So, Gustav, will you pay for it?
We will pay for it when, if we put it like this.
Sorry, you can elaborate, sorry.
Yeah.
It was a very direct question.
Yeah, but if we put it like this, as everyone knows, for a couple of 2 years, the rates have just gone up and up and up. So, and we can see that the service levels for us is actually declining. It's longer lead times and so on and so on. And so then Carl-Johan says, pay more for more efficient and more sustainable fuel. But we think we already do pay a lot of money for this. So, we can pay 30% more, but what do we get if we already is having a decreased service levels and so on?
But so that is putting sort of the emphasis on something else, that can you actually, if I take it a little bit further than what you're saying, so can you actually do this green transition where there's going to be a premium on transport because you need to pay for having it emission-free, when you at the same time have the problems that we see now in the supply chain? Is that going to delay it? Is that what you're saying?
No, not necessarily. We want to go more sustainable, of course. That's one of our key elements in Orkla sustainability. But we still need the service level. We still need we still need Carl-Johan and to actually promote it to us. When I go to a meeting, it still is price. It's not, we don't start with the negotiation with sustainability. We start with price. So in that sense, we will go to price directly and not sustainability. So I think the topic need to be put much more forward in the negotiations right away. And then we will not talk about just the high prices. We will talk about sustainability. How do we make it more efficient? How can we use data to actually benefit our supply chains, Volvo supply chains? So it starts early in the meeting, that we don't focus on price right away. Don't say pay more. Say instead, what can we do for Orkla to actually make you more efficient and be more sustainable?
So what you're saying is it starts with Carl-Johan, that you have to be much better at putting this forward in the direct business relationship with your customers. Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
And don't you do that?
Gustav and I go to very different meetings, evidently. No, but I think herein lies the conundrum, in the sense that I would argue that you guys go very short, you go spot. We make commitments for 20, 30 years, over and above that, we are now going to have to build vessels that are much more sophisticated, much more expensive, and we're going to fuel them with things that we don't really know what it will cost, but probably quite a lot more than what it costs today. And of course now there is a spot market that forces you to pay 3 times as much today as you did before. And if I may, sort of, and just sort of on the solution side, I mean,
Go ahead.
In Asia, you look at this much longer term. You sit with longer term commitments so that you guys get predictability. You guys get the services that you're asking for, because what I hear from you is that you're not happy with the services. You want more transparency. You want higher frequency, and you want the environmental transition, which is a pretty tall order, bearing in mind that most ship owners have not made money over the past 20 years. And it could be in a different formula where the cargo owners are willing to say that in order to facilitate, to ensure that this goes forward, that also the very sort of spot nature of the business needs to be reassessed, so that there is an element of not only burden sharing, but also performance enhancement, because we all want to be good guys, and we don't necessarily want lots of forwarders cutting in the margins between us and you. Yeah.
But can I just ask, because ultimately, I mean, so you can push for sustainability, and we can have a discussion on, you know, who should pay, or how should the burden sharing be between cargo owner and ship owner, but ultimately it will be the customer. So how do you see it from a customer perspective? And I have to ask you two guys about that, because, you know, will the customers actually be willing to pay for this? You know, the whole discussion about green transition, the movement among young people and so on, but at the end of the day, are there an understanding and a willingness to pay? Do you think that they can move this further?
Yes.
Yes? Was that the answer?
There is a willingness. I mean, transport is too cheap today.
Woo! Did you hear that?
Absolutely, I can say it again. No, but I have some experience, or Volvo Group has some experience. I mean, it's not cheap to shift your ships into renewable fuels, I understand. It's not cheap to shift trucks into battery electric and fuel cell electric either, I can tell you. It's extremely expensive, and you just need to dare to do it, and to count on that end customer will actually carry this cost. You know, it's not just you and me and making a contract, you know. I need to, you know, talk with these guys. And when we are doing a very quite simple calculation on the bottle of milk, you know, being transported on a truck, it's nothing, you know. This huge cost that we have up front here to shift from diesel to electric. And if you actually transfer that cost to the bottle of milk, you know, let's just do it, Reese.
If I may,
Yeah, please. Go ahead.
Despite the doubling of your transportation cost, it's the transportation cost between Asia and Europe is still less than 1% of the price of your truck.
Exactly.
So, I mean, that is what we're talking
Yes,
about.
What are we arguing about? I mean, it's honestly, it's just, and it's not because I've been the head of sustainability for 20 years in Volvo that I say like this, because it sounds a little bit like that, I know. But it's actually, we don't have a head of sustainability any longer, because I wanted to come to this. That is, when you do it the right way, you don't do it in a sustainability department at headquarters, and you don't sign all these pledges and what you have. You actually get it out there in the system, and not at least to the purchasing department. And you met with Andrea Fuder, Carl-Johan, our CPO, Chief Purchasing Officer. She likes to say it Chief Partnership Officer instead. You know. But that is what it's all about. We need to stop this, you know, transactional discussions and negotiations and stuff like that, and find the partnerships instead. And you know, the world is shifting to green, isn't it? I mean, it will happen. So it's better to be early, maybe even a first mover out there, right? And I mean, we are gaining market share by the day now because we are first out with electric trucks out there. And it's a bet, and we don't know if we are too early. We don't know, but it just needs to happen. So, you know.
But that's why you're a member, I guess, of the First Mover Coalition, because, you know, the first mover is also taking the big risk. But if you do it in partnership with others, you can basically unload some of the risk, because there's other parts of the supply chain in there, as far as I understand you. Can I just, because you are in consumer goods,
Yes.
and food stuff and things like that, which is very close to end customers, so to
Yes,
see.
it is.
So will they pay for this?
Put like this, will you pay for it? Because you are the end customer for our products.
I will.
Yeah.
I'm just saying,
Yeah.
and I'm sure that the. So,
Because-
but your mainstream customer, will they pay for it?
Yes, yeah, they would. They would, because we were looking at the whole, we are already at Orkla very sustainable, and we want to go the whole mile. And looking at the scope 3 and with transports and so on, that's where we need to work a lot, because we can't do it ourselves. In our factories and so on, we can be more efficient in the production and energy and so on. But within the transports, we need help. We need partnerships, partnerships. So it's very important. So as I said before, when I go into a negotiation, I'm the closest. Karl-Johan and Niklas, you are way up, but I'm more at the floor. So, but our negotiations are price. But we need to create partnerships so we can reverse the topics and talk about sustainability, more efficiency, and so on.
Can I? Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
When you are talking about partnerships, I just think it's incredibly important that these are not rate agreements that are a couple of months long and then that can be ripped up when it doesn't suit us any longer. You should just know that the ship owner, David, other people, make an investment today. Get the product in 2025, 2026, that we're going to be operating for 20 years. So, I mean, the risk that we are taking in putting capacity into the market is significant. And what I think what we're asking for is maybe not necessarily rate increases, because we're getting those through market fluctuations, maybe, what do I know. But it is the longevity of the commitment, that there has to be, for us to operate in a spot environment while taking these hyper-long commitments. I think that's one of the key reasons why this transition is taking so long and is so difficult.
You wanted to comment on that?
Yeah, I would like to comment on that, because here is where I think the word transparency fits best. Not transparency on reporting and showing if you're doing good. Absolutely, that's fine as well. But where we absolutely need transparency, that is here in this dialogue, so that we understand the 20-year outlook and all of this, and actually discuss together how can we be successful, both partners or even more partners in that, to really understand how can we make this cake be this cake, and let's share it in a good way instead, you know. And there is, I think, transparency is key. And Volvo has been extremely bad in this, I can tell you.
Okay.
Our traditional way of talking with suppliers, and we have 55,000 first-line Tier 1 suppliers, so we have quite a lot of them. And we have engineers sending in our specs to big guys like, Bosch or, these bigger than Volvo, this component should look like this. I have made all the calculations here, what is the price? And we need, no, it's too high, That's the wrong way of doing it. So we're shifting all that. I mean, we talk with our suppliers and the whole supply chain. How can we work together? What are your innovation skills? What are you looking forward to? Did you make commitments to also be zero emissions at a certain point in time? Align a bit. So it's a little bit shift in mindset.
Of course, it is, yeah. Karl-Johan, you wanted to comment on that?
I mean, what Polestar has said and what we are hearing now, I mean, is a much deeper understanding, I think, of the complexity of the problem, and I think is absolute music to
your ears.
to our ears. And in the sense, I think this is also very much where the shipping industry wants to go. And of course, if you're not beaten up at every turn, it's much easier to be transparent. I think we would love to share both data to be able to enhance performance that I understand both of you are looking at, if we know that we long term will not use that against each other.
Yeah, exactly.
We don't have much more time, I think, left. 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 2 minutes, yeah. Just another question, which is a little bit off this, but still. So if this is something which has to be industry-driven, if this is something where we have to build partnerships, coalitions in order to get their longer-term contracts and all the rest of it, how does that? How are we going to perform in sort of the international competition doing this? I mean, are we going to be outperformed? Will we set the trend for everybody else? Will we drag the world towards green, shipping? Or how do you see sort of this play out in a sort of broader perspective? You first, Niklas.
Because we are international industry, most of us. We might be headquartered on an island in Gothenburg, but I mean, we can make this change. It doesn't need to happen here only in Europe, right? So I think that is a tool that we sometimes tend to forget in the Nordics, that we have, as companies, quite a big influence everywhere in the world, actually. So if we, and you know, it's about winning the game. It's not doing it just to save the world. It's about winning the game, because the regulators will come up to speed sooner or later. And then it's better to do it beforehand and grab some market space.
But the reason I'm asking you, because in the shipping industry, we would have a lot of colleagues, not here, but elsewhere in the world, who would say, we're not going to move 1 inch before the regulators tell us to do so, because we'll lose out on our competitiveness.
Yeah, we have them in our industry as well.
Exactly. So we have that in all industries. So how can we overcome this? And
they will be losers. Do you need everyone with you?
It's good. We hope so.
So we hope they will be losers.
Yes,
so
of
our
course.
problem is that we don't lose before they win, so to speak, and that's why we need regulation. But that's why also we need commitment from both you guys. I think what Magda said was really interesting at the end, that it's not about the EU, it's really then about the EU affecting the IMO.
Exactly.
And I would think the same here would go for Scandinavia. That, I mean, Orkla is a major manufacturer in Northern Europe. You're super global. I mean, the whole notion that let's transform the whole world tomorrow doesn't seem to work. We've tried that now. This whole concept of green corridors in our region. Here we have coalitions of the willing, and if Niklas and Gustav are now truthful when they go home, and we can build these partnerships, we can build infrastructures like I think what the Dunster people have done in the North Sea. That is cutting edge, and that will ultimately, in the long term, survive. But I can tell you, we will not survive, those of us who are competing on a global basis every day, unless we have home markets or coalitions of the willing. And I think if we now believe what the commissioner is saying, that we're going to be carbon free by 2050 as a continent, some of us actually believe that's a very good thing for humanity and good thing for Europe. But that means that at least in Europe, Volvo as a European company, Orkla as a European company, needs to support the European ship owners, because if you don't, we will not be around, because we are competing every month in a rock hard spot market where we're not being paid for what we're being done, even though we know that we are the solution, and even though we know that we will ultimately win, we have to survive until that day. And I think that's the purpose of this this seminar here, is that in lieu of legislation, there is a sense of urgency now, that there is accountability, and I agree with you, where the priest came in, that it's about us. What do we do? What choices do we do as consumers? What choices do you do as cargo owners? And I will try to commit, or I can, at least on behalf of the Dunster people, clearly show that we're in the absolute cutting edge of global technology, so that we now can say that it is not a hard-to-abate industry. There are solutions. We just need to come together in our partnerships, and at least if we cannot do this on a global basis, but we should be able to do it on a European basis. And if we cannot do it on a North European or Baltic basis even, I mean, should be the dollhouse for the world. If we can show a good example.
Do you buy into to the vision of Karl-Johan, basically?
I think going forward, going sustainable and green corridors will be a comparative advantage for sure. And from our side, that's what we want. We really want more clear and sustainable transportation. And going in the Baltics is perfect. In Baltic region, we are very foremost in this region. So starting at that region would be perfect for us.
I can say, for talking about how we can build this vision of being a region, not only Europe but also Northern Europe, Nordic countries, Baltic Sea, is something we're also looking in Danish shipping. We had a study made for our annual day last week. showing how much energy is needed. Of course, it's sustainable energy needed to actually fuel just domestic shipping in Denmark and those who bunker in Denmark. And we will just about make it if the most ambitious plans are being fulfilled. But we have to really speed up. So we'll also need authorities, politicians, governments to actually build out the green electricity we will need to actually make our fuels. One last, and to have these green bunker hubs or green corridors that you're talking about. But one last question for you, and it's going to be a quick one. If you look at what is going to happen from now and just until 2030, and let me remind you, 2030 is just around the corner. What is the one thing that worries you could derail this whole green transition? Is there one thing that could, in your opinion, derail this? Niklas, you are a sustainability guy. What can derail the sustainability transition?
But maybe it is if we as humans are relying or trusting policymakers to lead the way, honestly. Because that is something we don't have time for. And we are so used to it for generations. So it's another of these transitions that we need to, cultural transitions that we need to.
Yeah. That's the one.
Yeah.
I'll go to you first, Gustav, and then I'll end up with Karl-Johan because you have so much at your heart. So Gustav, what is the one thing that could worry you in terms of derailing this whole process?
Maybe that we are too comfortable in how it is, and that we don't really try to make that difference. I think that being too comfortable at home and don't go into meetings like this and talk to each other, start the partnerships. That we don't want to change the status quo. I think that's the.
Okay, Karl-Johan.
Yeah, there are only European people in the audience, so it's almost only, so it's relatively safe to say this. But actually, it's to keep our European project on track. EU today represents 13% of global GDP. We don't set the tone. God forbid that we would have had a different outcome when Russia invaded the Ukraine. Now we responded through unity. We hear from the Commission that the whole Fit for 55 package is not thrown overboard because of skyrocketing energy prices, despite the fact that Orkla is paying significantly more for its transportation, at least on the trucking side and not on the shipping side. You are still saying that this is what you want. I think that's pretty unique for Europe, and I think Europe still has a psychological leadership of the world, that was going too far. That we still have a lot to contribute to in actually making the world better, and I think it's all up to us Europeans to ensure that the Commission, European cargo owners, and not least European ship owners are actually leading the way and making the world better. And I must say, how do we ensure that Europe is competitive going forward? Because the world without Europe is probably a nastier place than it is with it.
Thank you very much indeed. And I think it's a good way to end, because what we just heard was, first of all, vision, but also a firm believer that we as Europeans, as North Europeans, as Dunship people, as ship owners, cargo owners, can actually do it ourselves. And the worst thing we can think of is if we only rely on politicians, or if we get too complacent or too comforting in our own right. This is a call for action, ladies and gentlemen. I think we've heard from these three wise men in this church that this is going to happen. Thank you very much. Give them a hand.
Wow.
Thank you.
I almost have goosebumps, right? The transition is here, it's now. Amazing, thank you, thank you. It's been a lot of energy, fantastic meeting so far, I think. Thank you all, but now I think we need lunch, right?
So I am now joined by four gentlemen representing different perspectives, both the fuel perspective and the engine perspective. We have Claes Fredriksson from Liquid Wind. We have Stefan Nysjö from Wärtsilä. We have Jostein Bogen from ABB. And we have Gregory Hartig from Gasum. Please give them a warm hand. All right, so it's now up to us to describe the solution for the future. And as you know, the expectations on us are high, but I think we are ready to take on that challenge, right? I would like to turn first to the engine manufacturers. Where are we actually today? What's the status of different engine types and solutions? And perhaps starting with you, Stefan.
Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, maybe first of all, before I talk about the engines and the future fuels, I think it's good to remind ourselves of one thing that was said this morning. We heard it several times, and that is the most sustainable fuel is the one never used. And with that, what I'm trying to say is that we believe very hard in energy efficiency, energy conservation, and are putting a lot of attention into solutions and systems that conserve energy, basically. Then, of course, on the engine side, we started, I can already say now, many years ago to test various alternative fuels of all sorts. Well over a year ago, we started to run tests on methanol, ammonia, hydrogen in full-scale engines, and we have done so ever since. So we are in quite far down the line. Earlier this year we launched the first commercial product in the new build market for methanol use, and we will be launching additional engines next year. On the ammonia side, I would say we are a little bit behind the methanol schedule, but we will also see products coming into the market perhaps towards latter half of next year. And then finally on the hydrogen side, which is very, very much something which is requested in the energy market, where we also supply our engines. We are there running on pure hydrogen today, and try to fight the technical challenges with that. I would say maybe we are there a year or two behind the ammonia in terms of product being ready for the market. But this is happening. It's not about the future. I mean, the decarbonization is not about technology. It's about a lot of other things, and I'm sure we'll come back to those later.
Excellent, thank you. Jostein, turning to you.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. And first of all, also thank you for the invitation to be here today. And I think as with fuel, there is no one solution in terms of technology either. I think we'll see different technologies for different types of vessels, different operations. And from ABB coming from the electrical powertrain side, we see that electric propulsion and electric power plants can be a way to future-proof the vessels. So we are investing a lot in the power plants being capable to take in different energy sources, to take also in different engine types. And in terms of battery technology, we see a huge uptake of using batteries, not only for fully battery-driven vessels, but also for hybrid applications to make them more efficient. And I think your ambitious project in Stena is a good example of that, with the Stena Electric that can travel up to 50 nautical miles only on batteries. And with that, I think we can also solve a lot of the short sea shipping only with batteries. And then in ABB, we also look at alternatives to burn the fuel by converting the energy in the fuel using fuel cells. And I think we can also collaborate closer with the transportation industry there, for instance, with Volvo Trucks and Scania, for instance, to see how we can deploy also the fuel cells technology more efficiently in marine. And we actually this year putting the first fuel cell vessel in the water, which is a container vessel that will run only on fuel cells on the rivers in France. So I think the LTPEM technology that can run both on hydrogen, potentially also on methanol using a onboard reformer, is indeed commercially available. We also see the high temp technology maturing that can also potentially run on other type of fuels.
Excellent, thank you. I think it's very promising to hear that there are solutions available, and it's also obvious that we need to pursue different pathways given the fact that shipping is quite a wide industry and comes in many forms and shapes. So, turning then to the fuel side, what's the status here? When will we see these new fuels that Magda is talking about becoming commercially available? Claes, turning to you first.
Sooner than you think. We are ready to go. We are going to put the spade in the ground in October, and then it only takes us about 2 years to build the first plant. And the plant we're building is for electro-fuel, where we take electricity and make it into a liquid fuel. And it's something we do very simply by first making hydrogen, then combining it with CO2, that we get out of the smoke, as they say in the media. Take the smoke from a power plant, concentrate the CO2 in that smoke, or in that flue gas, and then the two gases together become a liquid product, which is methanol, or what we call electromethanol, and that's the fuel that we do. So it's completely well-known technology. We work with partners that have been in the business for anywhere from 50 to 100 years. It's a way of producing methanol in a man-made way, or in a manual way, using resources that we have lots of in Sweden. We do this in Övik the first time, and we can, as I said, get it done very quickly. And we have not only one plant, but 2 more plants in the plans, so we can be delivering about 250,000 tons of this green fuel by 2026.
Excellent, thank you. Grégoire, turning to you. What are your thoughts on when the new fuels are coming?
Well, I think when we talk about new fuels, I think we have to see it in the availability and the commerciality in relative terms. You know, how commercial, how available are they in terms respective to other fuel solutions. Technically, we heard they're available, they're feasible, but at which scale are they available? At which scale? Now, can you hear me now? It's better? Okay, great. At which scale, at which price, and with which distribution infrastructure are they available? Now I see 3 types of new fuel. The first one is LNG. It's still a newcomer in the energy landscape. It's a fuel that has now a lot of traction, and the ship owners here on this island have bet on it quite early, and I bet they're happy with it. It's widely available, and it actually ticks a lot of boxes environmentally that are requested. I mean, NOx, almost no NOx, no SOx, and no particle matters. Slight contribution to greenhouse gas reduction, but still a reduction compared to conventional fuels. It is widely available. It's technically easily to manage. So this is, I would say, the first fuel, the most evident candidate today that we are seeing with a huge growth. The second category I would see is the biofuels. We have HVO, we have LBG, liquefied biogas that can be used to decarbonize existing vessels or existing usage, both on LNG and fuel-propelled vessels, fuel oil. But the availability of HVO, for instance, is not there. And I would personally suspect that given the limited volumes available, those would go to other markets like aviation, probably. Which still leaves us with the LBG. And the LBG, the biogas production, is picking up in Europe, and the European Commission, on the back of the recent energy crisis, has stated that they want to increase tenfold the biogas production in the future, which could lead us to a 25 million ton per annum biogas production in Europe in 2030. So there is quite a steep progressing curve there today. And it can be used as a drop-in fuel in any share of the LNG used in any vessel. So you can gradually increase the decarbonization and accompany the decarbonization pathway that you've set for the next years. And that's available today, again, as new solution or a new fuel, but it's available today to decarbonize. And then I see the third category, which is the hydrogen-based fuel. It's methanol, it's ammonia, but it's also methane that is based and synthesized on the base of hydrogen, but also CO2. The critical point here when we talk about cost is the cost for the green electricity, because obviously you don't want to produce any of those fuels with methane or fossil fuel, but you want to produce it with green electricity. So the input of electricity that you will use to produce these fuels is crucial. And at 40 euros per megawatt hour, as the wholesale markets were before the crisis, to 150 to 200, you see there is a huge gap in terms of the input of energy used for these fuels. So I think that's kind of the landscape that I see today. And from my perspective, Gasum, there is one fuel that kind of allows you to go the different steps, and that's methane.
Thank you. So we hear that the technology is here and the fuels are here, but we've also heard quite a lot about the chicken and the egg problem. How do we actually create a demand for the new fuels? How do we get ship owners to start investing in the new technology? Jostein, turning to you, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a good question, of course, but I think you have the classic chicken and egg dilemma, and in order to unlock this, I think it's very important to support the first movers. Not only in terms of CapEx support, but also operational support, because both the technology and the fuel are going to be more expensive for the first years. So I think that is one important factor to get, let's say, the wheel turning and get up the volumes, both in terms of technology and fuel production. And I think another important point is co-innovation, how we can work together as an industry in clusters, represented with different parts of the value chain. And I think one good example of that is what we heard in the opening speech this morning from Maersk McKinney Center. And another example is actually ABB and Wärtsilä working together in a project where we're looking at reform some of the hydrogen out of the LNG and combined with CO2 capture, use that to lower emissions. So as an industry, we need to work very closely together.
Yeah, that makes sense, I think, and we've heard good examples of that. Gregor, what would you like to add to this?
I think what is essential is a good regulatory pathway. We have seen with the growth of the LNG usage as fuel that the initial steps were taken when the ECA zone on the IMO 2020 cap was introduced. That's when the shipping industry started reflecting about what can we use in alternative to the oil that was used beforehand. But I think also that I'm quite confident that if those regulatory steps are set and are transparent, the industry will follow. We have seen that for LNG, for instance, the different actors started to invest. The first movers started to invest in LNG fuel vessels. Then there was Skanga's Nauticor that started to invest into LNG fuel and LNG bunker infrastructure in order to deliver those fuels. And we see that today in Europe, it's widely available. It took a bit of time, clearly, but it's there. So I think if we have a clear pathway to go for, and the objective is there, then the first movers, those that have a true belief and a true conviction of where this is going, they will be there and they will develop the infrastructure. But I think it's also interesting to take a step back and to see the bigger picture. We have a lot of different fuels today that are available. There's oil, there's LNG, fossil LNG, there's LBG, ammonia, hydrogen. And what will be interesting in the future is to see where regulation will pinpoint the different fuels. Is it the most rational utilization to have HVO used in the shipping industry, or is it in the aviation? Is it most rational to use the hydrogen, the initial hydrogen production that we will see in the shipping industry or in the industry, the heavy industry, the steel manufacturers, for instance? So I think on a system basis, what will be very interesting to see if we manage to have the right fuels directed to the right utilization. And again, I think that, for instance, LNG or liquid fuels that are available and will be available in the future are best in heavy road transport or in maritime industry, where you need a lot of energy condensed on a little space in order to make the voyages that you want to do.
So you're actually suggesting that we make quite a complicated issue even more complicated, but that's usually the case when you are in a transition, that there are no really easy solutions, but you need to have this systematic view. So I think there. Klaus, please.
I think there is a fairly easy solution, and I think in this room here, Stena pioneered that in 2014, 2015, went together with Wärtsilä. They said, let's convert one of our ferries, or the engines on one of our ferries, and let's start run on methanol. And they did that, I would say, quite successfully, and the whole world had the eyes on this sort of opportunity. Let's go methanol. And then as they went methanol, others started looking at the possibility of making green methanol, us included. And I think it's been absolutely phenomenal to see that since then, so many other shipping companies have come on board to do the same thing. And Maersk, I think we all know, they have ordered 12 ships. CMA ordered another 6 ships just recently. And we see a lot of conversion to the methanol because it's so simple, because it's liquid, because we know how to handle it, it goes in the same tanks, it's all there. In addition to that, the fuel itself is very, I should say, good for the environment and good for the climate if it's a green one. But it's just sort of so simple, and I think all shipping companies, they know how to use it. And when I go on the Stena boat or Stena ship and I meet the guys in the machine room and they say, hey, we know this stuff, this is easy to work with. So I think that there's a huge opportunity there, and sometimes we might make it a little bit too complicated. We're going to have so many different versions. Why not just take one that actually works? All we need to do is build enough power, produce enough power. We can do it here. We can do it in other countries where we have cheaper power, cheaper solar power, and the whole world can be part of this transition.
Yeah, I think that's one perspective. I know that there are different perspectives and there are different solutions that we see, but I agree with you, we need to get started, and I think what's very hopeful here is that we hear that we have the technology to a very large extent, it's ready to be implemented, and we have the fuels, and we need to get started. Turning to you, Stefan, what you talked about that we need to work with this issue from many different angles and that you need the broad perspective. Could you elaborate a little bit on that? How do you think, what's really needed to accelerate the transition?
First of all, let me just correct you on one point. It's not about we need to get started. This is moving already. So let's be clear on that. And that's positive. Now, what I alluded to is the fact that sure, we need clarity on the regulatory side. Everyone talks about that and why and that's related to risks. So everyone is looking to de-risk whatever they are engaged in, whether you are engaged in producing an e-fuel or whether you are a ship owner who don't know which option to choose. You are looking to de-risk. But I agree with the first panel this morning that also concluded, or that was at least my takeaway, that we can't stand by and wait for the regulatory environment to be clearer. Eventually it will. But we need to move now, and the way to move is to collaborate. So what we need to see is that the different parts of the industry, we need to look at the value chains, get the value chains to get together and jointly de-risk things so that the threshold for the ones who is investing in, a biomethanol or an e-methanol, it's comfortable with it. There is a secure offtake. And for the ship owner who needs to be somewhat comfortable with what will be the cost of this fuel, both are seeking to de-risk. And what we see when we talk to our customers, but also to other stakeholders in the industry, is that this is where people don't seem to find each other. So I think my point here is we need to think differently, and we need to start thinking that who is it ideal to collaborate with, where we can share the risk, and then we'll see it moving, even without the regulation.
Yeah, thank you. Jostein, would you like to elaborate a little bit on additional levers and pathways towards more sustainable shipping?
I think what we have also heard today is that hydrogen will be a very important energy carrier, either to be used directly on board, but also as a basis to produce other synthetic fuels or e-fuels. So I think we need to let's say, boost the investments into hydrogen infrastructure. And of course, hydrogen is produced ideally from renewable energy, so we need also to further boost the investments into renewable energy. And another point I want to make is that we also can learn a lot from the transportation industry, the heavy-duty transportation industry, and try to take benefits of that technology, which is also produced in high volumes, to get the cost on this technology down as well, to unlock the chicken and egg dilemma.
Yep. Excellent, thank you. And turning to you, Gregor, with the same question, what's your thoughts on additional levers and pathways?
I think, and Stefan pointed out initially, I think the best energy or the cleanest energy is the energy which is not used. And we see from our customers, from the ship owners that order new tonnage, that there is a lot of effort put into the optimization of the vessel design, the optimization of the engines, the optimization of the way that the vessel is operated, the routes, the weather forecasts, reduce the waiting time before the ports, not rush into our ports and then wait 2 days before the port, before unloading. So there's a lot of effort put in there, and I think it's far from being marginal what the savings could be in terms of fuel savings, CO2 reduction of a container transported, for instance, from Asia to Europe. And on top of that, you have obviously other levers, but I think one element that we have seen that changed in the landscape in the last 2 years is that there were already LBG, liquefied biogas solutions available, decarbonization solutions available in the last years, but we have seen little demand for that because the price, the incremental price for those solutions was too high. Now we see that there is a bigger attention to CO2, but we still miss a bit that the cargo owners or the container owners that ship the goods from A to B, they claim they want to decarbonize, they want to reduce their CO2 footprint. When they're asked to pay for that, and then oh well, maybe not this time, maybe next time. So I think there's also a step there beyond the declaration. So actually put the money where the mouth is, and they say, okay, I want to decarbonize. It has a cost, but I'm ready to bear it because it's worthwhile.
Excellent.
Just comment on that,
yes?
because I think that's something we spend a lot of time with in terms of how do we get the price, the new price out, because there is a green premium, and there's definitely a green premium in the beginning. And one route is, of course, to try to chase some subsidies, which you may or may not be able to do. But I think we rather like to see that we get it to the end user. And it may not be the shipping company. It may actually be the cargo owner who is willing to pay the premium on a long term, because we always want to go long term, minimum 10-year contracts. And what we're trying to see is, could we sell the fuel, I don't know if he's here, directly to Volvo or directly to H&M or directly to somebody else? So they theoretically own the fuel, and then they can put it in whatever ship is there. And that's one way of doing it for us. And then we would trace the source of the fuel all the way from the wind farm or the wind turbine and essentially the tree where the biogenic CO2 came from. So we have the tracing and the transparency on that one. And then we have the ability to go all the way to the end user. And we're trying to get that as one solution. We then have essentially a tank here in Gothenburg harbor where others, or these cargo owners can own fuel, and then we bunker from here. But that's a little bit far out, and the shipping companies are not totally, I'd say, comfortable yet. But we're hoping we can go to that level, because then they would be not taking the risk on the fuel, which has been what we find the difficulty in getting them to pay the premium that we need.
I see. Thank you. So we are coming to the end of this panel, and I just want one quick comment from each one of you. What's on the top of your wish list to really make this transition happen? If you could wish for one thing, what would that be? And since I haven't prepared you for this, the first one who comes up with an answer gets to start. And then
I start then.
Excellent, Stefan. You're brave.
But I give you two.
That's okay. That's okay.
The first thing on my wish list is that, and this goes to the ship owner side, that ship owners would realize the amount of energy wasted in their fleet today, because that is where the first step is. There is a lot to be saved. Then, secondly, I would wish that we collectively could start to look at the situation differently and really think differently. Many of us are representing companies. Companies are there to compete and survive. But this is not about competition. Here we have to collaborate. And my wish is that we would start to realize that, because decarbonization will not happen if there are companies who try to fix it on their own.
Thank you. Nice two wishes, I think. Yeah, Jostein, I'm looking at you.
I can go next, and I think it was also touched on this morning as well, but I think what we also need to realize is that it's the consumers that eventually have to pay the bill. And I wish we could be willing to take a bit larger part of that bill as consumers and use the purchasing power we have on the cargo owners, and the cargo owners will set them to the shipping companies, and the shipping companies will set them to us as the suppliers. I think that's one of the things that we should really wish for.
Yeah, and that ties nicely to the beginning of this seminar where we talked about responsibility and that we all carry that responsibility. Thank you. Jaguar?
I was kind of going a bit in the same direction, in the sense that I think what really needs to be, or what I wish for, is an increased discussion and collaboration between the shipping companies, the fuel suppliers, in order to make sure that we can transfer the added value that the decarbonized transport creates to those who use it and to those who actually request it. And I think we see us as a fuel supplier, obviously, but also as a supplier that can help decarbonize, as a service provider of decarbonization with LNG, with LPG, and maybe in the future with synthetic methane. But I think for that it takes really to work together, and because if we only go for head-to-head competition and go for the cheapest price, we're going to stay with oil.
Excellent, thank you. And finally, Klaus, turning to you, your wish list.
Thank you.
What's on top of that one?
One of our core values is community, which is part of collaboration. And we've done that very successfully with our suppliers since we started. Essentially, it's in 2017 or 18. We have the same suppliers. We work with them every day to get this facility built. My wish is to see if we can have a community on the buying side, so we can have 3, 4, 5, whatever it might be, shipping companies or cargo owners that collectively say, we're all going to buy this fuel together, and we're going to do it at a level of pricing which is reasonable for all of us. And we're fully transparent all the way back what the cost is. But if they can then come in and see that nobody's going to pay more or less than the other. So we're all really doing the collaboration thing you're talking about very much in practice. And we have our meeting on Monday the 20th. If we agree, then we can build a factory. If we don't agree, we're going to be a bit later than what we planned originally. So my hope is that we can really get that collaboration for real also on the buying side.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And I would just like to conclude this panel with 2 different sayings that I think sums up what you talked about here quite well. There's an African saying that goes like this: if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I think that really sums up what you have been talking about, the collaboration. And then finally, just to dare is to do. We are past the talking. We now need to start doing. So thank you so much. I think you've been a fantastic panel.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And now we need to do some microphone works here. And meanwhile, I was asked, Carl, maybe you can sing a song or something while we are doing this. And the next thing is about, I will sing a song very shortly, and you will then guess what the theme is of the next panel. Do you know the ABBA song? Money, 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 dum-dum, pretty funny, dum-dum. So then you know, we're speaking about things cost. And now we will bring the money up on the stage. So, and the head of this panel is Anders Hermansson. He is the CEO of Swedish Ship Owners Association. So why don't you give a big hand for Anders?
Thank you. Thank you. Can you all hear me? Good. And then I hopefully can get this one tucked in my belt. And while the panelists are getting ready, I'll start off. And since I can't sing nor dance, I will try to do some speaking. Well, this morning we've heard, starting with Magda, on the regulatory framework, where we are heading, and the requirements that are there, and they're there to stay. We've heard from cargo owners and ship owners, and also from Polestar, that there is a need to decarbonize transport. And there is a willingness to join forces in achieving this. And perhaps there is also an element of risk sharing somewhere. In addition, we've recently heard of all the nice technology that's there. The fuels are coming. And now the trick comes, how do we finance this transition? And that is what this panel is going to be all about. And I would like to welcome my panelists up. First, Magnus Monton, CEO of the Swedish Export Credit Corporation. And Magnus has previously held several management positions also within Nordea and SBC. Michael Frisch, CEO of the Danish Ship Finance, and he, welcome up. Tommy Johansson, CEO of the Nox Fund, welcome. And Arne Julskils from the Swedish Svenska Skeppshypotek. Welcome. So, very happy to have you all here. And now we're going to do the trick on how do we finance or make the green transition happen. Having heard today's discussions, could you say a few words about how your organization, Magnus, and how you work with green finance?
Absolutely. So, first of all, SEK, we are a government-owned bank. We're regulated as a bank, and we exist to make Swedish export more competitive. And we do that basically by financing exporters, we finance their suppliers, and we finance their buyers overseas. And recently, we've also been given a very clear mandate from our owner, i.e. the government, that we should take the lead in financing the transition to a climate-smart future. And when we think about the transition, we say there are four industries that we think are particularly important. So that relates to energy, it relates to transition metals, it relates to smart cities, and it relates to transport and logistics. Clearly, where shipping is a very, very important part of that. Some 90% of all the imports and exports out of our country here in Sweden is transported on sea. So transition financing is really high on our agenda. And examples that we are involved with is financing wind power. We've done the largest wind power park here in Sweden, Ånge. We're financing offshore wind outside of the UK. We do electrification of railways, battery factories, and of course shipping industry as well when it comes to the most modern type of fleets. And the other thing that is important for us when we work is, we've talked about collaboration here already. That is also top of our mind. Is to collaborate with the other players in the ecosystem when it comes to financing the transition. And that includes the commercial banks, where we work closely with the ship financing teams in their organization. Also the export credit agencies such as our sister organization, EKN, the Export Credit Authority of Sweden. So collaboration is really key, and we've recently done a financing for Tantank. Some of you have seen the ship arriving here this morning together with Swedbank. So it's a kind of deal that we're very proud to participate in. And we're also interested in collaborating with fellow panelists here today.
Good, thank you. And if I ask you, Michael, how is it in Danish ship finance? How could you say a few words on how you work with green finance as well?
Absolutely, and thank you very much for having me on the panel. Looking very much forward to that. Danish ship finance, we're a specialized institution. We lend out money to shipping companies with the first lien mortgage in the ships. So we only do one thing. So we're a really simple company, what you could call a one-trick pony. So it's the only thing we do. And we've been doing it since 1961. We have about $6 billion of lending. And a part of our ownership structure is that 15% of what we make every year goes to the Danish Maritime Fund, which goes back into the industry also in terms of green initiatives. But sustainability is a very big theme for us and has been so for the last few years. And within sustainability, the environmental part is the largest focus area, and within that, the decarbonization of shipping is by far the dominant theme. And it is so in more or less all the stakeholder interactions that we have today, whether it's investors, owners, clients, regulators, or what have you. So we made this part of our strategy as well. And it's important to you, of course, all know this. This is a transition. It's not something that will happen overnight. There's a lot of reasons for that. So what we try to do is not to create what you call a small green club, where we say this is green and this is what we can do and everything else we won't do. So what we would like to do is work with the clients and say we realize that our clients, ship owners, have multiple of ships. Some are more green, and some are not. And the ones who are not may contribute with income that can also finance this green transition. So we want to work with the client as such and not only look at the single assets. So I think it's important to see, at least for us, that this will take place over many, many years. And what we really value is what has also been mentioned earlier today, is the transparency theme. Both for us as banks, it's expected of us that we're very transparent about the impact we have, the indirect impact, but we also see that increasingly so and becoming increasingly more important for our clients to be transparent about what they do, how they do it, and what kind of goals and targets that they set, that they will set for the future.
Thank you. And Arne, what's the situation in Svenska Skeppshypotek?
Yeah, Svenska Skeppshypotek, I guess our main issue when it comes to green financing and environmental issues is that we're usually married to our clients for a long time because we issue very long loans. So it's easy to become a green lender, it's just to stop doing the old stuff. But for us, we need to be a little bit more active, and what we've done is to incorporate the environmental footprint and the maturity of a shipping company's ESG strategies. We put that into the risk matrix, and also the internal rating is dependent definitely on the environmental link of the company and the fleet we're financing. So that's how we can structure a deal, whether we can lend more money against an asset or not. And secondly, that goes directly into the pricing. So our model is a little bit more dynamic. We don't have sort of a green policy as such that we should only do green, but when we do existing vessels or things that may not be able to be categorized as green, we work with the client and come up with a strategy together and understand their angle and long-term strategy. Because it's so easy to get into, we don't do that. Well, Skeppshypotek has a slightly different role in the society. We are here for this, the trade to and from Sweden, and then we have capacity within the shipping cluster. So we just can't we don't do it. We need to work a little bit with the existing vessels as well.
Thank you. Tommy, what about the NOx fund?
Well, we're quite a different scheme, I suppose, compared to these men beside me here. What we are doing is trying to reduce risk by making environmental investments on board ships. And how we do it? Well, we co-fund the investment based on how much emissions that are reduced. And then you may ask, where did the money come from? And that's perhaps the special part here. And NOx is taxed in Norway, so this is a Norwegian thing, special for Norway. And the business organizations in Norway have succeeded to have an agreement with the authorities that they get an exemption from this tax if they meet an emission cap that goes down over time for the collective domestic shipping in Norway. So instead of paying tax to the state, you can become a member of the NOx fund, and then you pay a fee to the NOx fund, which is lower than the tax to the state. So that's our income source, and those money is spent 100% into supporting green investments.
Thank you. I mean, if we've heard earlier today, and we heard Magda talk about Fit for 55, we heard that there will be a higher pricing for probably the technology, but also maybe the fuels. And there is a huge investment need within the shipping community. Well, those green investments moving forward, those will be substantial. And if I would like to ask you, Michael and Arne, will you, as ship financing institution, be able to meet this need? Michael?
I definitely think so. And I think that, I mean, when we look upon ourselves as a bank, we have a number of investors that buys our bonds. We have owners that provides us with capital. And they are increasingly so demanding that our biggest responsibility is not what we do ourselves as a company, but it's how we deploy our capital. So what we use it for, and whether that is sustainable, especially on the decarbonization front. So I think that we will find it difficult to obtain competitive funding, have a good ownership structure, if we do not act in a way that sort of supports the green transition. So I think, I mean, right now we're doing a number of things also to incentivize the ship owners. There may be sustainability-linked loans, it could be green loans, it could be green bonds, and what have you. And I think that will sort of prevail for a period of time where you will perhaps get a little bit cheaper funding if you have a greener project. But I think if in the not too distant future, it will be a little bit more digital. I think it will be difficult to obtain competitive funding as a ship owner if you do not have concrete plans for how to sort of move forward with this, and if you don't have green projects, if you don't sort of adhere to different aspects of the sustainability agenda. So I think it will be, I mean, then of course you may see ship finance moving more to the east or what have you, but I think over time it will be difficult to get competitive funding and capital as a ship owner if you do not have very concrete plans for how to deal with the decarbonization. So I think actually the least problem over time, I think, will be to get financing for good green projects. I think it will be much more difficult in the future to get financing for black projects, if you want, for projects that are not green, or if you're as a company, if you're not having sort of a green agenda or you're moving in that direction. So I think there will be sufficient funding from our side.
Arne, you have the same view and the Swedish side?
Yeah, to very much so, to the same extent that we do new ships and new financings, but I also think that the industry needs to work together in order to convince bankers that tend to look at values of ships, that the investment actually makes sense. And it's very positive to see that we're actually going to be sort of cost incentivized to make these investments. And I think it's probably more prudent to say that, well, having a green angle or whatever you go and have financed is a necessity. It's not a good thing to have. It's not maybe going to give you that extra low pricing. I think on the contrary, it's probably going to be much more expensive to finance the old stuff, and maybe not even getting finance to it. So I think a little bit more dynamic, but in essence the same.
But if I look to SAK and also to the NOx Fund, I mean, you both have special tasks in terms of promoting and actually enabling the transition and in supporting this. In your views, is there a true willingness from the governments to support and cater for these green investments? I mean, it's for real, to put the money where the mouth is? Is that there? Is there a willingness? And will the funds from the government side also be there? Magnus,
absolutely. I mean, 100%. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, our mandate is super clear. And when you think, just use us as an example. You know, we're a little player in a country up north. We have a balance sheet of about 30 billion euro. The majority of that is financed through global capital markets, so bond investors. We have a target 2045 net zero emission from our entire portfolio. We have a target 2030, as was pointed out earlier on, that's just around the corner. 50% of the balance sheet that I have responsibility for should be green or sustainable. 50%. Today it's 7-8%. So I need green projects. And everything like the point that Michael is making is a very important one. Everything can't be green from day one. We need to be here and finance the transition. As long as we're moving in the right direction, you know, that is good enough. Of course, we would love to finance what is 100% green, but it's not realistic that we are there. So I think the answer to your question is an emphatic yes. I was in Lisbon last week meeting the global banks and the export credit agencies from around the world. They have the same targets and the same goals that we have. So I think my question would rather be, you know, will the industries be able to transition fast enough? Will the shipping industry be able to transition fast enough so that I can meet my targets?
That's good news. Tommy, NOx Fund has a very special purpose and a very special setup, but you have quite long experience in actually working with NOx. And how can we learn from this and bring it forward, working with CO2?
Well, yeah, as you said, we've been around since 2008 now, so we've been going on for 14 years. And I mean, we have been financing, well, more than 1,500 projects. So yeah, we do have some experience gained over time. I think the most important learning is that, and that has to do with the willingness from the politicians as well to do, is that it takes time and you need predictability over a long period of time, and that cannot be politically sensitive, I mean sensitive to political variations. So we need to trust our politicians that they stick to what they say and what they have decided and don't go back on things. That's an experience I have from Norway, at least, that, yeah, the circumstances can change and then the framework can change as well. So having set aside enough time, I mean, we have a 20-year perspective on what we have done since 2008. So at least that perspective when it comes to any financing mechanisms that would work with the climate change and that shift. Secondly, tax works. And also the loop, getting that tax back to the ones that need it as investments in infrastructure, in investments on border ships, and perhaps in the beginning also feed-in tariffs for the fuel costs. I mean, we have 1,000 ships on average every year paying into the fund, but only maybe 50 applying each year. It means that the tax doesn't really have to be that high to finance those quite few projects in the beginning. And then that will increase, and you can increase the the tax level to compensate, and the cost will go down. So over time you can stabilize the tax. So, but in the beginning, to get started, it's a very good mechanism to help the first runners, and not only the first runners, but enough runners that you get volume so that this is a self-sustained business.
Thank you. So perhaps we can learn, and there are clear incentives and intentions from government to move forward. But is there really a willingness for the financial sector to provide capital for all the steps needed? I mean, as we've heard it before, that we'll probably take it in 1 or 2 steps, or maybe we can take a big leap sometimes, but is there a willingness to deal with this risk? Because some of the technologies that are available today might tomorrow be obsolete, and only a few of those will move forward. And how do we deal with the existing fleet? The investment needs in ships that are there for 20 years more is probably also something that we need to deal with. Arne, how do you see this at Skeppshypotek?
Yeah, when it comes to the existing ships, I think I'll start there actually, and it's not really that much different from a new ship, because in a couple of years' time, the new ships are obviously going to be older, and we're going to need to do bolt-on investments on those as well. So for us, this is actually a long transition, and we're taking leap steps now, but it's going to be new steps taken in the future as well. So are we going to be able to finance this? Absolutely, because otherwise our risk is going to increase. The way you need to do it is to keep the question to yourself. Don't let the bankers take the question from you. You need to convince us that my old ship is actually very fine to work with. We have this strategy, and you come up with a good focus on ESG factors. That's when the bank is going to recognize that, okay, when you come next time and you actually ask for financing, we recognize that you're actually thinking or working with these sort of these issues. So are we going to be able to finance bolt-on investments or additional investments needed in order to stay not only compliant but also ahead of the curve? Absolutely, we need to, because we need to preserve the risk in our books. So I think that's actually where I stop.
Thank you. Michael, what about Danish ship finance?
Yeah, I mean, Anders, you're absolutely right about the question. I mean, as bankers, we are kind of paid pessimists in a sense. And what we live and breathe for is to reduce risk, right? And as a bank, we primarily have the downside risk. If something goes astray, we sit there with a non-performing loan. So we look very much into avoiding having stranded assets. And especially in a big transition phase with new technologies coming in, old technologies also being there is a big risk of stranding assets. So in terms of taking out the risk, I think to a certain degree that you have to have some level of risk sharing within this sort of maritime sector. It's not just one. It's not just the consumers who eventually perhaps they will pay. But I think in the meantime, I think there's a lot of risk sharing that needs to take place. I think potentially the ship owners need to come with more equity in the projects if they're more risky. I think there should preferably be longer contracts with the cargo owners, long off-take contracts with the fuel suppliers, support from governments, for example, regulators, but also banks taking more risks. I think perhaps we do take a little bit too few risks, especially in a transition like this. So I think there is a responsibility from the banks as well. Perhaps lowering margins, but I actually think that's a lesser question, because I think it's the availability of capital that's the interesting part. And then I think, I mean, we're not engineers, and we're not really capable of determining what's the right type of propulsion for the future. But what we do value quite highly is that there is some kind of flexibility on the ships, whether new ships or old ships, so that they can be retrofitted, so there is possibilities for different kind of bunkering, to have some kind of flexibility on board the ship, so that we can avoid this risk of stranded assets.
Thank you. So Magnus, what's in your toolbox? How to support these investments? And I mean, there is also the matter of risk sharing, which we've heard a lot about, but there is also, we heard on the pricing, for example, of fuels, and who will pay the extra dollar for the fuel. And can you support in that? And how can SEK be a strong partner in that?
Sure, so several questions there, but let's start with the toolbox. And let me just share that actually the first loan that SEK ever did 60 years ago, 1962, we're turning 60 years, was actually for a ship finance for the ship MS Berit that came out of Finnboda shipyard for export to the island of Åland, I think it was. And so we've been working with ship finance ever since, and we can do pre-shipment or down payment on new ships even before there is a possibility to take a mortgage over anything. Of course, we can finance new ships. We can refinance existing ships. And we also work with working capital finance solutions to ship owners and companies in the industry. And we're also active in the entire ecosystem when it comes to shipping. I mean, if you take the green revolution, the green industrial revolution that's taking part in the north of Sweden today with investments into battery factories, green steel, we're part of all of those dialogues, and we think about the entire infrastructure that needs to be built up around there. The ships that will carry these goods overseas when they go on export, absolutely. We need to probably rethink, how those ships are made, and not to talk about the harbors and the energy and the logistics all around that. So, SEK, we're quite active in that space as well. When it comes to risk sharing, what I should mention is that EKN, the Export Credit Agency of Sweden, they nowadays have, since this year, they have a green domestic guarantee to help to share the risk. If we lend or if other lenders, as the commercial banks are involved, as long as it's green projects, they can give out domestic guarantees to help bankers be a little bit more prepared to take high risk. Similarly, Riksgälden, the Swedish National Debt Office, they now also have green domestic guarantees. And the way that Riksgälden and EKN have divided up the market is that EKN, they will handle green guarantees up to a total amount of 500 million Swedish, and Riksgälden, the National Debt Office, for amounts above 500 million. So that's important for you guys to be aware of, and also for the banking community to be aware of the existence of those type of instruments. I just want to mention very quickly one example of a financing like that we've recently done, also on the topic of transition, is the financing of the refinery of Prim up here in Lysekil. It's a 3 billion Swedish krona investment of renovating the refinery there so that they can make diesel basically with renewable raw materials. The first stage up to 40% renewable raw materials, and then further on even higher than that. And hopefully this is something that will benefit this industry as well when it comes to fuel supply.
Thank you. One thing that we've heard quite a lot about today is transparency. And in the past, we've heard a lot about EU taxonomy, the Poseidon principles, and so forth. So, Arne, how will this show for ship owners? What will be the requirements?
Yeah, well, obviously the taxonomy is very handy if you want to do green defined loans. It's just to follow the EU taxonomy for shipping. When it comes to the Poseidon principles, it's more perhaps related to the lenders, how they behave. Now, coming into those sort of systems is you get the better scoring if you don't do the older stuff. So it may separate the financing industry a bit. But I think the EXI and CII that are coming into force, hopefully, now, that's going to help the banking industry to have a more active dialogue with the shipping companies. You will need to learn us how to handle the question. Don't leave it to us to make assumptions. You need to work a lot with your banking or your lender community to get them to understand that you understand, you have a strategy for it. I will make my own assumptions unless you help me with that. So when it comes with the taxonomy, the various regulations, help us to understand that you guys are fine and you're going to do well, because we are going to judge a client from a corporate perspective, how mature you are in your strategy or your ESG strategy, and we're also going to judge your fleet that you want financed. So we need to understand those two components, and unless you continuously talk with us, it's going to be difficult.
Thank you. Michael, how is it in Danish ship finance? How do you follow up on this? On the reporting, and what does the ship owner really need to show to be able to access green financing? Are there any things that you want to point to that is of particular importance for the ship owners?
Sure. A few comments to what you also mentioned. We have the taxonomy. I think it's, if we take the positive side, I think it's good that we get a definition of what is green. I think from a personal perspective, I think I could have done with a different kind of definition. I still think it's better that a ship transporting fossil fuels have propulsion that is zero carbon than if it doesn't, and that distinction doesn't really exist in the taxonomy. So I think it creates a little bit too much of a small green club for now, to my taste. But in addition to that, of course, we work with the Poseidon principles, where we measure the carbon, the CO2 footprint versus the trajectory as set by the IMO. When we started out 3 or 4 years ago, we were deemed as being all too aggressive with this. It was not possible. And now we are perhaps seen a bit as lagging, because the IMO targets, in my opinion, is lagging a bit, at least to the Paris Agreement targets. So I think that we will look whether we can make the Poseidon principles a bit more, you could say, aligned with the Paris Agreement versus just with the IMO targets. I think if we don't do it within the Poseidon principles, it will still happen. As a bank, I think that we will be measured by our stakeholders whether we live up to the Paris Agreement or not. I think that will be the yardstick that we will live by. And the way we go about this is, of course, we measure each and every ship how much CO2 is emitted. But we also do a full sustainability rating of all our clients, based not only on the E parameter, but also on the S and the G. And if clients do not sort of land sufficiently well, they will not get financed, at least by us. And I think this is something that we will see much more going forward. Not only the decarbonization part right now, that is the most important, it will probably continue to be. But I think that the financing institutions will, over time, take this responsibility much more seriously and evaluate each and every client whether they live up to the standards that we want. So I think, I mean, also being here at Donso is a pleasure, because the ship owners here and in the sort of vicinity are very well positioned also to take part in this and fulfill these criteria. So I think this is excellent that you're doing this here, because I think it's very much aligned with at least how we see the world, that we are going to move within the next 10, 15, 20 years in order to get shipping decarbonized.
Thank you. And very good discussions. And as always, a panel runs to its end. But I have one final question that I would like to ask each and every one of you. If you could ask for one thing from the regulators or the governments, or perhaps even the EU, to truly be able to kickstart green investments in shipping, what would that be? Who wants to go first? Tommy, perhaps?
Well, I'm easy on that one. It's a similar scheme as I represent. I mean, a tax where the money is fed into an investment fund which can help shipping in the transition phase, at least in the beginning. Yes, that being my wish, investing in ship costs, operational costs, and infrastructure costs. And that also being followed with IMO caps on emissions that doesn't give a kickback. You keep the emissions low, and they make sure that you stay there.
Thank you. Arne?
Yeah, so I think what we need to work with is obviously that if you're going to invest, you need to make it worthwhile. You need to have a return, otherwise it will not be sustainable in the long run. So how do you get to that? Well, I think to start with, you definitely need to even out the prices of biofuels and call it regular fuels. If you do that, then you can start actually to take the steps that we need to take through this transition. It's not the one-step fix. It's going to take time. This generation of ships coming out now, they need to be modified in the future. But if we want to kickstart this and actually get somewhere, I definitely believe in, I don't like taxes, but it may be handy to either take away from the biofuels or add to the other stuff. That's my comment.
Thank you. So, Magnus?
Yeah, two very quick things. As an export credit agency, we abide by the OECD rules. So the OECD rules, they need to be reformed when it comes to sustainable finance. We need greater flexibility, we need longer tenors, we need to be allowed to give higher down payments, and we need flexibility when it comes to amortization. And the second one is with the EU taxonomy, and it's already been mentioned. We need that to develop faster because there are too many things that fall outside of the definition of the EU taxonomy. One very important area which we've talked about is transition. So that needs somehow to be covered in the EU taxonomy also, I think.
Thank you. Michael, sorry.
Yeah. Well, I think the green premium for the new fuel types needs to come down. And the easiest way, the silver bullet to a certain degree at least, is a global carbon tax, of course. But I think it's, as been mentioned, I think several times today, we don't have the time or the luxury to wait for the regulators to get this in place. We just need to start somehow, and I think everybody needs to chip in until we have something that is a bit more of a level playing field.
Thank you very much. And may I ask you all to give the panelists a hand, please? Thank you. Excellent. With that wish list, we can bring this forward, and I'm very happy to hear that there is financing available for the green transition. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Well, 3 panels done. I think things look great. As far as I understand, we have the will, we have the technique, and we have the money. So let's do it. But I'm not the one to sum things up here. We have a very distinguished guest who will help us elaborate and sum things up to clear our minds and maybe point out how to bring things forward. So he's a senior economist. He is the former Minister of Finance of Sweden. I want you to give a rock star welcome to Anders Borg.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to listen to this very interesting discussion and also to be here. I must say that I feel very comfortable being in a church, and particularly when I see these drawings. My mother was very involved in this children's hour in the church, so I spent a lot of time in the church when I was a kid. And this might come as a very shocking statement from you, but my mother were always saying that I talk too much, that I really can't understand why. And then she was saying then therefore I would become a preacher. So now I at least have the opportunity to say that I've done one church. And it's also fantastic to be here at Donsön. When Carl-Johan Hagman called me and asked me to come, I remember, and I don't know whether this is an urban legend, but my memory is that Carl-Johan once told me that when he went to China to contract one of the big ships, for Stena. One of the Chinese very large shipyard owners said, "So Stena from Gothenburg, is that close to Donsö?" So I haven't been here before, and it's very nice to be here, and this is obviously a very interesting industry. I will give some perspective from my point of view on where the industry is heading, somewhat on the outlook for the challenges in the short term, and also some reflections on the very interesting discussion on the green transition. So to start off, trade and shipping has been crucial for humanity. If you think about the first 298,150 years that scientists believe that humans were on Earth, very little happened. There was shipping, obviously, from the Phoenicians and forward, but then it was very much luxury goods like spices, furs, salt was obviously important. But then after these 298,150 years, things started to change. We started the Industrial Revolution, and we came into the era of trade of everything. And that's very important, because if you look at human welfare, the first 300,000 years, very little happened. And then after the Industrial Revolution, humanity started to build common welfare for everybody. And sometimes we forget about this. But remember that when we grow 2% per year, we double our we increase our living standard with 50% in 2 decades. If we grow 3%, we double it. And if we grow 6%, we actually triple it in 20 years. And this is obviously a fact that is very important today, because emerging markets are growing 6%, and they are bringing hundreds of millions of people out of poverty every year because we have economic development. And that economic development could not happen without shipping. You probably already heard this famous example of the black lead pen, you know, the yellow ones that we used in school. If you just think about the fact that nobody can produce such a pen. And the reason for this is that you need the copper from Chile, and that has to be taken out with equipment from Sandvik and Atlas Copco, and it has to be shipped from Chile. If you look at the cedar tree that are grown in the northern part of California, that has to be cut down with machines, chainsaws, maybe from Husqvarna, and it has to go to sawmills, and it has to be transported maybe to Vietnam or to Poland or somewhere else when it's assembled. And the black lead, that normally comes out of Sri Lanka, and it's been shipped somewhere. So trade of everything, none of us, if we take away the stuff that has some component of thread from all of you, I think I would look at a very kind of naked communion here, because trade is everything today, and shipping is a crucial part of that. We could not live with the living standard we have today without having shipping, because we know that trade is important. We used to think that it was the wool and the wine that you remember from university that Ricardo taught us, that it was the comparative advantages that was the key. But what we learned over the past decades is really that trade is super important for spreading technology. So we remember our own history. It took us almost 200 years to grow into a welfare state. China, with 10% growth, 50-folded their living standards in 40 years. India is now in the process of doing that with 6% growth. But what they did was that they allowed foreign direct investment. And foreign direct investment we've always had, but what we have today is it's very intricately connected to technology. So we bring the global technology and the higher productivity to the global economy via investments. And those foreign direct investments are normally about export. But the prerequisite for them is that there are some type of property rights that makes people far off willing to build a factory in Calcutta or in Chengdu or somewhere else. And then again, then there has to be shipping. You can't have this living standard and economic development without shipping. And let's face it, the shipping industry has gone through a dramatic change over the last 30, 40 years. You don't have to go far back in history when export goods contained maybe a shipping cost of 10, 15%. The reduction of shipping costs over the last 2 or 3 decades has been spectacular. I saw that the ECB did a calculation on the current shipping rates, and these numbers might shock you a little bit. A 50% raise on the shipping rates will increase average inflation the next year with 0.25. Because shipping costs, if we buy a pair of trousers, a new tie, the shipping cost is almost always well below 5%. And that is thanks to these new container technology. It's thanks to our new tracking devices. It's thanks to more efficient ships that consume less fuel, and an overall improvement of our system. And I do think, obviously, also port automation has been very, very important to really make this just-in-time delivery possible. And I'm saying this because some people nowadays says that we need to do home shoring and that we should not trust the global trade system anymore. But that's a very strange statement, because if you don't trust the global trade system, if you don't believe that we will have a lot of ships coming and going and connecting these supply chains, well, we will not have the prosperity that we are all benefiting from today. So there is no chance that we can bring, the global middle class. And that's important, because you really define a middle-class person as somebody that can be a part of the global value chain with an education, with a consumption pattern that actually implies that you're a part of a global value chain. So the global middle class today is growing with some 40-50 million people per year. So we're adding every decade a new Europe. Every year we are adding a new Spain to the global economy. And these people, growing at a much faster pace than the general economic development, will require more shipping, because that's how the global system works. If we want people to be able to come out of poverty, have a nice house for themselves, be able to educate their children, and have some savings for their old age, then we have to be a part of a global trade system. So I think we definitely overrate. If you compare the amount of production that has been retaken to the US or Europe, to the tons of newspapers that's been written about this, it is only a phenomenon that really happens in the newspapers. In the real industrial production, people are still depending on the global value chain, and then shipping has to be a very, very important part of that. And it's not over. So this year, corporate taxation in India is hitting 20%. It used to be 35%. It used to be 40%. The reforms during COVID in India implies that they've opened up their FDI regime. And you know that manufacturing in India has always been impossible because of the employment protection law. So Gandhi decided that you really couldn't fire people if they have more than 200 employees, and then you cannot have industry. Those are now being dismantled. So industrial production, not very surprising, are now growing much faster in India than GDP. So they are now, it's roughly 1.5 billion people now entering the global value system and also the global supply chains. And this is fundamentally good. And all of you that are in the shipping industry are completely instrumental for that process. Without shipping, there wouldn't be any world trade. And without world trade, there would be no reduction in poverty and no increase in global middle class. So you can kind of feel that you're actually doing something that is not only good for the shipping industry, but something that is fundamental for the world economy. I will also say a few words on the current situation, because it's important for you when you think about your own companies. I think what we are in now is a situation where the to-do list from Powell, Lagarde, and Ingves is very clear. They will secure price stability. It is not a problem that the central bankers are securing price stability. You know that Lenin once said that the fastest way of destroying a country is to debunk the currency. Well, maybe the Russian Revolution was more efficient, but having said that, inflation has never helped the country. It is price stability that makes the market economy efficient. Because when price mechanism works with low inflation, we know that if one item costs more, we should probably consume less of that, and if we produce efficiently, we should follow the price the information that comes out of the market prices. And when you start to get high inflation, nobody really knows what is happening. And therefore we get into trouble. So there has never been a high inflation society that has built prosperity. And in Sweden we know this better than most, because between 1970 and 1990, for 20 years, there was zero improvement on normal living standard for normal Swedes, because inflation ate up all the wage increases and our economy functioned very poorly. So I don't think we should be upset that the central bankers are taking care of securing price stability. It's good for the economy, but it can only be done by moderating growth. They will raise the rates until demand is more moderate, so that our potential GDP actually can carry it. They will push up unemployment somewhat because wage moderation is necessary to secure price stability. So this means that 23 and 24 will be mediocre years. You can't come around that. It's the only way that you can really suppress inflation. But I don't think we should be that short-sighted that we think that an economy needs zero interest rates. Most of the times when I've been working in markets and with companies, we have lived with 3% and 4% and even 5%. So it's not very shocking that interest rates are coming up. I guess that Fed, ECB and the Riksbank will hike the rates with some 200 basis points the coming 12 to 18 months. And that is obviously difficult for an overvalued stock market. But for normal corporates, I do think that it's much better to get a period of moderate growth rather than a high inflation society with bubbles and disinvestments and difficult mistakes in economic decision making. So I think we should accept the fact that growth is slowing down a bit, and that makes it very important for us that when we think about our companies, to be very prudent when it comes to cost control. We obviously need to be sure that liquidity is flowing in the system, and we need to protect our profitability. And I think this is a little bit of a shift, because over 21 and part of this year, I think everybody has been kind of irrational exuberance in terms of optimism. Now we're coming into a period where the tailwind is slower. I'm not saying that we're going to have a heavy wind coming upon us, but we're not going to get that much tailwind going forward. And fundamentally, that is something that we need to accept and actually see as a good thing, because the worst that could happen is that we lose the price stability. That is actually a cornerstone of well-managed economic policy. I would also like to say a few words on the green transition. If we look at the shipping industry, it's pretty clear, and that was very obvious in this panel, that we have many alternative fuels and energy sources that we can look at. It could be blue hydrogen, ammonia, it could potentially be CO2 scrubbers, it could be batteries, it could be renewables. So what do you do in this type of situation? Well, I think it's very fundamental that we let the market forces actually work here. We need to have a lot of experiments. If you have a problem with high degree of uncertainty, you don't put all your money on black. You're not saying we are only going to do this. And the worst type of solution is that we set up a government commission that decides that the whole industry should go for one. There is a need for policy support here, and I really like the comments from Magnus Montan and Michael Frisch, because it's obviously more risky to invest in projects with high degree of uncertainty. And there is clearly a role for government guarantees, for research support. You can have tax breaks. You can use the fact that the state, particularly in the Nordic countries, have a very strong credibility, so that you can help take out a little bit of the risk. And then different ship owners and different shipping companies will experiment. You might build one methanol ship, you might try for some blue hydrogen, you might do even some battery solutions or whatever. And then in 10 to 15 years, we will have a lot of innovation. And I'm pretty certain that a couple of these technologies will be more dominant, but it's not a very nice solution to have the government or EU or somebody else to decide this is the solution. Because with this high degree of uncertainty, we really don't know. I mean, if these, for examples, I've been reading about Exxon's work on CO2 scrubbers. If that would work, a large part of the problem, even if you're running very large tankers or very large container ships, a big part of the problem is solved. If we see some breakthrough in modular nuclear or fusion energy, it might be that that's a solution. So I think we need to be open-minded here and really ask for support for experiments, where I think financial solutions, both in terms of guarantees, but maybe also in runoff financing, could be very important. So I think it was good that the banks were now kind of saying that we need to be constructive. I come now directly from Paris, where I was at the Amundi Investment World Forum, and the best takeaway from that meeting was actually the ESG discussion, because the whole focus was how can we invest to help the transformation, not by excluding companies or sector, but by finding solutions that actually bring us forward. And Amundi is, as you know, the largest wealth manager in Europe. So when this type of organizations start to think, how can we do constructive ESG to help sectors to move forward? And the government can obviously play a role in such a process. I think that's the right approach. If you only can say we will not do this, then you're not really helping out. It has to be constructive, it has to be well done, and it has to be transparent and built on rational criteria. But there is obviously a role here for moving this industry forward. And I also think that we need a lot of policy coordination and cooperation. I like the comment from Wärtsilä that, I mean, difficult problems you normally solve in clusters. You have somebody producing the engine, somebody owning and running the ship, somebody owning the cargoes. And this type of cooperation, I think, is crucial under a period of high uncertainty. We have a huge problem that we need to solve, and it's probably most rational to try to be open-minded in such a process and also try to cooperate. So I think that was a very, very good message. So this will not be a long ceremony, so I will round this off now. I think it's been fantastic to come here, and it's such an interesting industry to be a part of. And I do think that world trade will continue to grow faster than GDP. So shipping will be a sector that is also growing in the future. We have challenges, not the least the transition, but we will deal with them. And it will be a crucial part of building a world where we can actually have a global middle class that actually includes everybody. So thank you very much for bringing me here, and thank you for this very, very interesting discussion. Thank you.